This is a molecule of water, H2O. How does H2O occur? How is it that there can be such a structure in the universe as H2O? What is H2O? H2, it means that there are two atoms of hydrogen. O means that there is one atom of oxygen. So the oxygen is red and the hydrogens are white. So these are atoms. How do they hold together? How does a hydrogen atom, how do two hydrogen atoms hold together to an oxygen atom? In this kit, there are little plastic inserts. Little inserts. What are those? In chemistry, it's called valence. It's a relationality, and that relationality is an energy, and that energy has a certain specific, exact intensity or level or quantum. So that atoms, different atoms, hold together because they have a shared relationality. You remember on the mythic level that one of the most powerful of all glues in tribal society is the experiential function of reciprocity. You give me a gift, I give you a gift. The whole substrate that makes business possible in a very large, humane way is the sociocultural phenomenon of reciprocity. And one of the dehumanizing factors of money is that money is a neutral that does not value, that does not take part in a reciprocity deal. That's why barter is so satisfying. You give me this, I give you that, we're both happy. You give me money, I give you this, you're happy, but the money leaves me wanting to do something with it other than have it to increase it, perhaps, or to be involved in some kind of neutral scheming. So reciprocity is a tribal glue which turns up in the business world. It's a substrate. The Chinese term for business is the term for sell, which is mai, and the term for buy, which is mai. So business is my, buy, sell. But business is best when there's reciprocity. That principle of reciprocity takes place also in the world of chemistry, in the world of physics, in the atomic world. All molecules are based upon reciprocity. But it's a reciprocity not of things, but of energy states. Now, sometimes these states in physics are called eigenstates, but we don't have to talk about using strange words, even though we're in science and we should use that kind of vocabulary. We're not expecting anybody to follow it purely scientifically. So let's come back. We're starting with a molecule of water, a model of a molecule of water, H2O. The white hydrogens, two hydrogen atoms have a relationship with an oxygen atom. What is the hydrogen atom? The hydrogen atom is the most simple atom there is in nature. And it has two distinct parts or elements. A hydrogen atom by itself has a nucleus and it has a single electron that goes around it. So it has an electron and it has a nucleus. Now the nucleus happens to have a proton and a neutron, both. But what are the characteristics of a nucleus? We get the term nuclear from nucleus. We get the term electronic from electron. So the nucleus of an atom and the electron of an atom are somewhat different. How do they stay together? Because again, here's the reciprocity. The electron and the nucleus have a deal. They have a very sweet deal with each other. And when electrons do not have a deal with some nucleus, they're looking for a deal. And these electrons that might not have a deal of their own, these are like ions. And ions are always hungry to make a deal. But they will only make a deal with a nucleus. Now there's a curious thing. The electrons, from which we get electronic, or terms like electro, always have a sweet deal when they're paired with the nucleus. And the nucleus has a particular kind of a quality, whereas the electron has an electronic quality, the nucleus has a magnetic quality. So that there is such a thing as principles of nuclear magnetism, not just because of nuclear like nuclear bomb, but nuclear in the sense of nucleus. So that when we speak of electromagnetic energy, we're speaking of electrons and nucleus together. And when they have a deal, the deal always takes a shape, a focus, and that focus, in order to be real, must be exact. And the exact focus of an electromagnetic deal is an element. And the first deal that God made is hydrogen. He said, Mr. Electron, shake hands with Mr. Nucleus. Done, hydrogen. Now it's somewhat glib, but it's glib, like Patton said, right? Loud and dirty, so you don't forget it, so you don't remember it. Okay, the atom is a deal. The molecule is also a deal. But it's like a larger level of deal. Each element is a level of atomic deal. Each molecule is a level of a molecular deal. Now, if you bring out a molecule of alcohol, this is ethyl alcohol, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hydrogens, 1 red one, which is oxygen, and 2 black ones, which is carbon. So in order to get a molecule of water, you have 3 atoms. In order to get a molecule of alcohol, ethanol, you have 9. If you want to water down your alcohol, you're dealing here with 12 atoms into a deal. If you want to have organic compounds, you bring in a benzene ring with an alcohol molecule, and it isn't that the dog jumps through the hoop and then you get organic molecules. You have to have a whole arrangement, a structure. The benzene ring holds together because the energy interface on the molecular deal is a ratio. And the ratio always expresses itself in exact energy terms. So that the interfaces between atomic elements to make up molecules and between molecules to make up compounds is always an energy interface. And that ratio is real. There's something very mysterious, something very profound here which can be missed. It can be missed because of overlooking. And that is to say that the ratio of energies has a structural reality. Atoms are not real because the electron, the proton, and the neutron are so there, but it's that their energy relationality is there, and that's why they're real. It is very difficult to bring into focus. It's somewhat mystical. But science cannot mature itself. Consciousness cannot be self-reflective without understanding this fundamental basic issue. If this room were the size of an atom, the nucleus of water, or the nucleus of oxygen, the nucleus of hydrogen, the nucleus of an atom would be about the size of a pinhead, somewhere in the middle of the room. So that the there-ness of an atom is almost completely space. Its reality is not due to the space at all. It's due to the energy ratio. So that these little gray tokens are indicative of energy relationalities. They make electromagnetism possible, so that electromagnetic energy is always a ratioable reality. And that's why when you calibrate for it, the electromagnetic spectrum, you're not calibrating for something which is inert. You're calibrating for a vibronic coupling of electrons and nucleuses, and of those deals with larger deals called molecules, and even larger deals of molecules with other molecules called compounds, and that's how we get stuff. So that the stuff is real, not because it's there, but because its vibronic coupling energy ratios are calibrated sympathetically into a pattern which holds. So that when you're dealing with principles of nuclear magnetism, you're dealing with resonances. And that's why you can have something called nuclear magnetic resonance. And nuclear magnetic resonance records on a spectrograph, and the study of that spectrograph is spectroscopy. So here's a textbook on nuclear magnetic spectroscopy. And that principle holds all the way through reality, such that you can have a textbook, The Principles and Practice of Electron Spectroscopy. And further, you can have something called biological spectroscopy. And you can have something like in astronomy, a study of the stars and their spectra, an introduction to the spectral sequence. Doesn't mean ghostly sequence. It means then that all of reality, everything that is real because of a certain harmonic pattern to the resonances. Thus, you can have Princeton mathematical textbook on harmonic analysis, 1993. Real variable methods and oscillatory integrals. That's what's real. That's what is science. Only consciousness, only a differential consciousness can get this. No tribe ever understood this. Though tribes used this, they never understood this. Harmonic analysis, the oscillatory nature of vibration, has been understood by our species for a long, long time. Here's a Maori mask, which shows up is the frontispiece of a lecture notes on physics, time harmonic electromagnetic fields and chiral media. Chiral simply means, does it spin right or does it spin left? Time harmonic analysis. The most famous time harmonic analysis of all in the 20th century was due to a man named Schrödinger. And Schrödinger's wave theory, which is the mathematics of quantum mechanics, which is one of the great building blocks of our sense of science today, is all based upon the fact that time must occur in specific relationalities. And those specific rationalities are delimited exactly, and that's why they're called intervals, and that the intervals can be counted. Not only counted arithmetically, but can be pliably manipulated consciously in terms of mathematics. So that mathematics does not only deal with numbers, that would be just simple counting. That would be like numeracy. But the relationalities of numbers is called arithmetic. But the differential relationalities of all kinds of situations is called mathematics. Not just numbers, not just arithmetics, but the time intervals also. So that when one has to deal with the real, you not only deal with things, but you deal with the energy relationalities equally with the so-called bits. So that when we're dealing with the universe, when we're dealing with what is real, we're dealing not only with the things that go to make up stuff, but the energy relationalities that are equal to the things. And those together make stuff. Which means that without differential energy relationalities, we are not real. On tribal level, most of the energy relationalities are operative, but they are operative in a way that are not available for our knowledge, our inspection. They're there as a substrate, They're there subconsciously, but they're not known. They're certainly intuitive, and they're certainly used. But exactly what they are is not known. But on the other hand, when one is working with a differential consciousness, one forgets the natural substrate. That now works as a substrate. That now works as subconsciousness. There wouldn't be a subconscious level, sometimes called unconsciousness. There wouldn't be an unconscious at all to consciousness, where consciousness in its differential fully related in a complementarity wholeness to the natural cycle. The fact of an unconscious is a symptom of disease. It means there is not a full complementarity. So the appearance of an unconscious in anyone is already a chronic case of cancer, psychic cancer. How come there's no psychoanalysis of real high-powered yogis? Because they don't have an unconscious. How come there's no psychoanalysis of a great many Orientals, so-called, Chinese? Why is that so? Famous letter from Carl Jung in 1942 to another analyst saying, the psychotherapy techniques, which work so well in Zurich, don't work in China at all because the Chinese seem not to have an unconscious. It's in the collected letters of Jung in the bulletin. American Indians were famous before they became reservationists for not having unconscious. Now one can say, okay, primordial human beings didn't have developed consciousness, that's why they didn't have an unconscious. Yes, you can say that. But there's nothing primitive about Milarepa. Anybody who uses Mount Everest as his ashram is pretty mature. There's no unconsciousness in Milarepa at all. No trace at all. This education is all about maturing and bringing together in a complementarity the integral and the differential, so that one is ambidextrous. You can work with either as a substrate or with both together in a term of wholeness. Now, one of the universal properties of stuff is that it does two different kinds of functioning. It's like a watershed. There's a threshold. On this side, the little molecules of water run this way, and on this side, they run the other way. On this side, stuff, matter, absorbs radiation, absorbs energy. But on this side of the threshold, it emits energy. So that there is a great watershed in physics of absorption and emission. And on spectrographs, one has to be very specific whether a line that shows up is an absorption line or an emission line. And each element has its own absorption and emission line. Each element. Why is this so? Because each atomic structure is a deal, and the deal has a certain tone. And that tone is an electromagnetic ratioed reality. And one can calibrate for that. And in order for anything, the constituents of an atom, the atoms of a molecule, the molecules of a compound, to keep their deal, they have to keep the handshake going. And that handshake ongoing, sometimes called vibronic coupling, so that one can have monograph like this. Vibronic coupling, the interaction between the electronic and nuclear motions. Because while the electrons don't ever stay put, there's no such thing as an electron staying put. They're always dancing. They're always, Feynman used the term jiggling. He loved that term, New Yorker, right? They jiggle. They're always jiggling. The center, the nucleus, also has its motion, nuclear motion. It has its quiver. And it's very sexy. The quivers and the jiggles. Right? The shoulders and the hips. When they go together, that dance is attractive. And God looks at that dance. And so when the nucleus and the electrons jiggle and wiggle together, God's looking at them makes them real. If they're not quivering and jiggling together, dismisses them. But when they jiggle and quiver together, then they're real. So stuff is real because it dances together in its way. And that dancing produces vibration. And those two kinds of vibration, nuclear motion and electron motion, those two form, it's like two waves when they come together. They crisscross and they make a distinctive signature which records on a spectrograph. We have calcium in this star. What do you mean? The star has calcium in it? Vitamin D? Yes. It's a very peculiar thing. You can get a single photon from a very, very distant star. How distant? That the light started there before dinosaurs even came. And the star has a calcium in its signature. It's a very old star. Why? Because in the beginning of the universe, there was no such thing as calcium. There was no such thing other than hydrogen, a very, very small percent of helium. Hydrogen has single electron. Helium has usually 4 electrons, sometimes 3. So the next step from hydrogen in terms of matter is a different structure. And while hydrogen is a gas and helium is a gas, it's very difficult to subject hydrogen to a liquefaction process, but helium liquefies very easily, so that one can have, if we can find it here, an old textbook, The Properties of Liquid and Solid Helium. And it turns out that liquid helium is very interesting to work with, and that a lot of developments of quantum theory were to look at helium in its liquid state and its various properties. And to take from that material, which is a special case of ionized gases. And when we have something like ionized gases, we have a realization here. Let's come just for a section. Page 56, this old Oxford monograph on ionized gases. Section C, excitation by light quanta. What do you mean, excitation by light quanta? Okay, you have a gas, and you shine a beam of light into this gas, and the gas gets excited. Why does it get excited? Because the gas is usually molecules either of a single atomic structure like hydrogen gas or helium gas, or a mixture of various elements in that kind of a gas. And by shining a photon beam, which have their own kind of vibrations, have their own wave energy vibrations in, the gas absorbs that vibration, and it gets excited to the extent of an interpenetration of several motions. When quanta, that is to say, bits of light, what are these bits of light? They're not what's real. What's real are the bits ratioly, this is ratio prejudice. When the bits are, Hollywood always finds a way. Ratio prejudice. The bits always have a sweet deal with the time, and that the bits of time are the intervals, and without those intervals of time being specific, and the bits of the nucleus and the electrons being specific, they don't crunch together. They don't make anything real. So that a beam of light is real not because of the photons, but because of the photons being in a deal with a time interval, and that this coming together then brings the vibration of the deal in. That vibration is an energy which can be known as specifically as you want. You can make a light beam of any energy whatsoever. You can make a gas out of any consistency whatsoever, so that by experiment one can come to understand when quanta of sufficiently low energy pass through a gas, this energy, the quanta and the time, are scattered. What do you mean scattered? It means that the molecules of the gas are not just there, but they're doing their own dance, and so that the vibration comes in and the time element comes in, and it is distributed as wide as the pattern of the movement of the gas. Scattered. So when quanta of sufficiently low energy pass through a gas, they are elastically scattered. Not just mechanically scattered, like little pegs stuck there, but elastically, because these vibrations have a periodicity to them. All vibrations have a periodicity to them, and that this periodicity has this elastic quality, and the periodicity is the way in which one calibrates reality. That's why when you want to find how do all the elements arrange themselves onto a table, they call that the periodic table. It's called the periodic table. Now we have ancient medieval 1975 periodic table from the Encyclopedia Britannica. You should see 1995 periodic tables. I think we have Xerox copies of them. You can arrange the tables not just in nice pigeon grid pattern, post office box pattern, but they can be arranged in many patterns. One of the best that I like is the chambered nautilus opening spiral pattern, because all elements on this periodic table, originally it was understood that they fit into certain levels. And a limited number of levels, mind you. 7 levels. They fit into 7 levels. And within those 7 levels, there are columns that run vertically so that you can locate any element in terms of its increasing structure, in terms of numbers of electrons and the size of the nucleus, but also in terms of the time interval relationalities and the fact that the time intervals also in that ratio deal include a kind of a spin. So that modern periodic tables take in spin as a property of elements, whereas originally it was not known, it was not understood. When we arrange elements in this way, there are 18 columns, but they don't number them 1 through 18. They give them various other kinds of designations for various properties, but in the very last column, the 18th column, that column is given a 0 designation. So you have 7 levels, and you have a number of elements in each one. In the first one, there are only 2 elements, hydrogen and helium. And on the second level, you have things like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. On the third level, you have things like aluminum. On the fourth level, you have things like silver. Finally, you get down, on the sixth level, you have things that stack up. Let's see, in the sixth, you have tungsten, gold, platinum, mercury, lead. On the 7th level, with uranium, you have all the other transuranic elements, all the man-made elements that go there. But what's interesting is at the very end, in the 0 column of all of these levels, is a gas. It's called, they're usually called an inert or a noble gas. And the very first inert gas is helium. That's why helium is so very interesting scientifically. So at the very end of the development of the periodicity of the deals between nuclear magnetism and electronism, at the very end of horizons of energy deals, are periods, a periodicity of periods, of elements that don't do very much other than just stick to their own deal, which means that they don't make compounds very easily. They don't mix with other elements very easily. They don't make molecules very easily. So there are very few molecules or compounds that have these gases. There's helium, and I think on the second level there's neon. Then there's argon, krypton, xenon, radon, if I remember correctly. On the 7th level, the transuranic elements have not gone far enough to find the noble gas on that level, which certainly exists, but hasn't existed in this particular universe, on this particular planet yet. It most certainly exists on planets of other star systems that have been around in business a long time, whose understanding of the business of reality is very advanced. There is a 7th noble gas, no doubt about it. What it is, we haven't got there yet. But the 6 noble gases that we do know of, because they occur, as they say, in nature, they have a 0 quality because all of the energy horizons, they used to be called shells, all of the energy horizons where the electron as a part of the deal can exist, where it has a place to exist, are all filled. And so it has these noble gases, like helium or neon. They are inert, or they're noble in the sense that they stand off by themselves, because they don't mix with others, because the only way that elements can mix together to make molecules is they have to have an exchange, a reciprocity of electron horizons. Shells is a bad term. It's like trying to understand the Kabbalah by understanding shells. There's no shells. There's a potential for a threshold, like a horizon, of movement to a different ratio. The threshold between kinds of ratios is what used to be called a shell. It's not something that's there. It's a threshold of tolerance, which is like a watershed, beyond which the deal runs this way, and before that, the deal runs this way. And when the number of electrons in the outer horizon of an element have not filled up all the spaces, there's a constant order out to buy electron. Any electron that you can find, buy. So the buy order is out from the stock exchange. We need it, we want to have it. Why? Because we would like to have stability. Because stability is somewhat impaired. That is to say that the nuclear wiggle and the electron jiggle do not mesh really solidly unless both are full. And because the nucleus is almost always full, it's always the electron partner who's mucking up the stability deal. And so one needs to have another electron. That's why two hydrogens can stick so really permanently to an oxygen, because an oxygen has room for two electrons. Its outer shell very frequently accepts two electrons into itself, so that the hydrogen and the oxygen, instead of being separate atoms, now form a molecule, which is what is real. In water, oxygen is not real, hydrogen is not real, the water molecule is real. The result of the deal is real, not the elements. Just so, it's a huge leap now, just so, when a spiritual being has the integral and differential functions brought into a complementation, their reality is on universal scale. And the integral and the differential functioning, even though they're different levels of dances, the jiggle and the wiggle of that comes together and a new reality is made. So that one is no longer the person once you were. One is no longer that partiality, but now the phrase translates into English as the new man. The new life. One is not reborn or rebirthed to another version or to a continuation, a succession of before, but something new. To have past lives in succession means immaturity. To have maturity means that that time interval is folded into the pattern in such a way that it is scattered permanently into eternity. And one never, ever has to take one more karmic step. Now notice how really rapidly high-powered, sophisticated language of religious nature just springs out of this material. One is talking about high school level physics, and in 5 seconds one's talking about very deep insights. Why? Because the material is accurate. The process of delivery is accurate, not just due to me, but because this is the way things are. But your maturity is not dependent upon getting it from me. Your maturity is fully a function of you being it. Well, we're going to take a break, but I want to, even though the machine has shut off, I want to just review one little bit. We'll start the tape again with this. Last week we talked about how in interstellar space there are carbon grains, the carbon atom, and how the carbon atom is extremely important because it is the basis of all life. It is possible to have a reciprocity, a substitute by reciprocity, so that instead of carbon being at the center of the molecular structure, of having silicon at the center. The element silicon can function as the element carbon. So that there can be silicon life forms. Which means that when one is working with silicon-based computer chips, if one is intelligent enough about it, one can make an organic computer chip, which could interface with a carbon-based life form. And what would be the resultant would be higher level of reality, for sure. And so there are possibilities. Evolution's not finished yet. But it certainly isn't going to jump because of fingers crossed and somebody's hopeful scheme, but because of actual deal made. Let's take a little break here. We're talking about science, and we're coming to a point which we're able to recognize that there's a threshold. This threshold has to do with energy, and energy in its ratioed quality assumes the toughness of materiality. And part of what gels at this particular juncture, the threshold of energy in ratioed interface so that the stuff of the universe is held, time assumes form. Time cannot exist without a form. It is possible to dissolve the form of time, but when the form of time is dissolved, you come up with either infinity or zero. It's interchangeable. Both are facets of eternity. As long as time is a form, time, in order to have a dynamic positive, must move. And so the direction of time has a physical basis. But the direction of time as a physical basis means that the positive succession of time intervals, which are real then, are not artifacts of someone's watch or someone's clock, but they're integrals of the very reality that is occurring. But that positiveness, which is real in one direction, is equally real in the opposite direction, 180 degrees, as a negative. So that time past is real in a negative interval spacing, and time future is real in a positive interval spacing. This positive and negative interval spacing of time makes a kind of 180-degree threshold, which is real, which translates into reality at the very basis of the periodicity of the elements. So that the very first element, hydrogen, is able to have a kind of temporizing, bonding quality. It's called the hydrogen bond. It was discovered in the 1920s. And it is real. The hydrogen bond is real, just like the covalence, the sharing of electrons, is real. The hydrogen bond is real for certain elements. Fluorine being the most characteristic of these elements. It's like the element hydrogen is capable of a yoga of such equanimity that its single positive ionic capacity functions in tandem with its negative ionic capacity, and it's able to hold two atoms of usually fluorine, or sometimes other elements. Nitrogen, I think, is another one of them. Oxygen, I think, is another one of them. I'm going to give a little quotation here from Linus Pauling. Just a little build up here to this quotation from Linus Pauling about the hydrogen bond, and we'll move on from there. As you know, Pauling is one of the great geniuses of the 20th century. Crazy genius. Fantastic. His book, Introduction to Quantum Mechanics with Applications to Chemistry, came out in 1935 when he was at Caltech. And here's the first edition. Introduction to Quantum Mechanics with Applications to Chemistry, 1935. Linus Pauling with a Professor Wilson from Harvard. Mostly really Pauling's doing. And all his life, Pauling was interested in doing a general chemistry, which would bring the whole science of chemistry under single volume. This Dover reprint is from the 1970 version of general chemistry. And in order to help educate a population of people, Pauling always interested and did with Roger Hayward this architecture of molecules. And in here is the hydrogen bond. And it shows that the atom of hydrogen can be in between a pair of atoms, let's say fluorine, in such a way that the hydrogen positive charge is completely facing 180 degrees from the negative charge, and because the positive and the negative are in equilibrium, the hydrogen atom functions as if it had two hands, as if it had a valency of 2 instead of 1. It is univalent, but it functions in equilibrium as if it had 2. It's a very important lesson. The bond angle is always 180 degrees here. Now, there are really deep revelatory qualities that can come out of this kind of architecture. But here's what Pauling writes. Page 428 of General Chemistry, the hydrogen bond. The hydrogen ion is a bare nucleus with a charge of +1. If hydrogen fluoride, that is HF, had an extreme ionic structure, could be represented as in a figure with, and then figure A is a big fluorine atom and a little tiny BB hydrogen atom together. The positive charge of the hydrogen ion would then attract a strongly negative ion, such as a fluoride ion, so that you have a fluorine atom backing up to the hydrogen because of its negativity on this side, and another held because of its positive on this side. This is extremely profound. In Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, talks about how yin-yang works. He says that yang embraces while yin carries on its back. Yang holds, yin carries. So that the positive and the negative, when they're worked together in equilibrium, they work in such a way that the normal polarities are obviated by the fact that they're a perfect equilibrium, a straight 180-degree horizon, that kind of a level, and that forms a kind of a bonding at the very basis of the periodicity of elements, hydrogen bond. The bond holding this complex ion together, called the hydrogen bond, is weaker than ordinary ionic or covalent bonding, but stronger than the forces of intermolecular attraction. So that you can have structure in this way. One of the most peculiar and universal of all molecular structures that comes out of this possibility, because hydrogen works its bonding with, not only with fluorine and nitrogen, but also with oxygen, means that H2O, water, when this fluid phase of this molecule water is taken to a temperature, cooled down, where it begins to solidify and forms ice, water ice turns out to be a universally interesting structure. As the water molecule lowers in temperature, and the temperature creates a phased structure, not only do you get one molecule of H2O, but the hydrogen bonds begin to function vis-a-vis the oxygen atom as if the oxygen atom were able to hold 4 hydrogen atoms together. And it's almost as if the 2 oxygen atoms were able to coalesce into one, and this is why liquid water shrinks and becomes a solid in ice, and that ice is crystalline. That there's a crystalline structure, and that the crystalline structure is related to but radically different from the fluid state of water. Ice and water are really radically different. They have different kinds of properties. So that one is able to say, as Pauling does indeed say, because of the electrostatic origin of the hydrogen bond. Electrostatic means the positive and the negative are in perfect equilibrium. A yogi in a deep high dharma meditation becomes electrostatic vis-a-vis the dance of Maya. So that the dance of Maya, its vibronic coupling relationality, no longer is a veil that becomes clear. One can see through it. Not just through eyelids and not just through a wall, but through it all. It was a transparent universe. Because of the electrostatic origin of the hydrogen bond, only the most electronegative atoms, fluorine, oxygen, nitrogen, form these bonds. Unfortunately for the universe, water, when it becomes ice, on the basis of an electrostatic equilibrium, makes a crystalline structure, which carries a lot of the functions of life in this universe. Ice is very necessary. Usually an unshared electron pair of the attracted atom approaches closely to the attracting hydrogen ion. Water is an especially suitable substance for hydrogen bond formation because each molecule has 2 attached hydrogen atoms and 2 unshared electron pairs, and hence can form 4 hydrogen bonds. So that an atom of oxygen can form a pair of pairs of hydrogen atoms, and that ice is actually very hermetic material. It's a pair of pairs of the most fundamental element that there is, hydrogen, held together by an oxygen atom which does a paired function in and of itself. The tetrahedral arrangement of the shared and unshared electron pairs causes these 4 bonds to extend in the 4 tetrahedral directions in space, and this leads to the characteristic crystal structure of ice. So if you want to get American Indian about it, ice is the 4 directions of the energy valences that come from equanimity. You can get very yogic about it. You can do a lot of deep, high Dharma meditation way up in glacier-clad Himalaya passes and really understand. Scientific yoga can really get into it. Now this whole quality of transforming polarity into complementarity vis-a-vis a threshold of equilibrium is a universal principle. What is the universal principle? That perfect equilibrium will transform polarity into complementarity. Integral functions will be differential functions, but those 2 functions will have a complementarity relationality to them. Whereas if you do not have an equilibrium threshold, like the hydrogen bond, the structure, instead of being a nice crystal, will simply be muddy water. Most people that we see, their personalities are like muddy water. Whereas really, someone who has gone through an equilibrium transformation, their structure is like crystal. Is a totally different phenomenon. And it's true that there's room for the functioning of muddy water, but by the same token, there's room for crystal personality. And crystal is not just crystal like salt crystal, but liquid crystals as a phase form of reality is extremely powerful. And personality, which is like liquid crystal, very capable of many functions that muddy water approximate ego has no way to even imagine capacities, much less perform. The spec sheet on muddy water ego is maybe half a page, and you need a whole library full of spec sheets in order to begin to tap real mature spirit personality. We have to talk here, we have to introduce a word here. We're talking about now liquid crystals and complementarity. We're talking about complementarity as it occurs, say, in the Tao Te Ching. The Tai Chi symbol is a symbol of complementarity. I'm not sure just where it is, but Niels Bohr's family crest has the Tai Chi on it. He put it on it. So that when it came time for him to try to put together a visionary, a theoretical, theoria means contemplation, a contemplative vision of the pattern of physics. He wasn't very good at mathematics, but he was one of the very best of all the contemplative visionaries of the 20th century, a saint, future saint, because he could allow the peripheral blinders that normally limit by taking time function cues as real and thus allowing for just a framed temporal snapshot of reality. He was able to let the blinders relax and get the moving picture version. And so instead of a snapshot theoretical mind, he had a cinematic visionary mind. One of the best ever. Really good. Einstein was a mathematician, Bohr was a visionary. A mathematician will figure out the ratioed relationalities but has to compute the functions, whereas visionary will intuit the functions and on that basis will deduce the placement of the bits, the stuff. They work in somewhat complementary fashion. Crystalline structure, largely known intuitive in nature from ice, from most primitive things. One can begin to date the beginnings of the maturation of this latest phase of humanity when the last ice age began to melt. And in a very interesting, mysterious kind of a way, the melting of the ice was like a cue to Paleolithic man and began to understand in deeply intuitive and yet tribal way some of the mysteries. But in another curious way, one of the great structures of crystals that we use now comes not from ice but from soap, and making soap. And in making soap, one of the words that comes here from the Greek word from soap is smectic. Smectic is a Greek word for soap. And smectic structure is one of the universal structures of crystals. It means it has a certain layered quality and that these layers repeat, however the layers are. So here on page 1213 of Liquid Crystals, this is 1994, so we're using contemporary science. It reads here under the headline, Smectic Liquid Crystals, rod-like molecules. Rod-like molecules, just simple rod-like molecules are able to form liquid crystalline phases where, additional to the orientational order of the molecular long axis, the centers of gravity are, on average, arranged in equidistant planes so that a stratified structure results. This is how you get crystal lattice. Not only are they all upright, but they're all spaced exactly the same way. Such phases with a stratified structure is called smectic. This term comes from the Greek, soap, because at first such liquid crystalline phases were observed on ammonium and alkali soaps. Analyzing the structure of these kinds of soap, the molecules are arranged in this way. These make layers, and that the various layers hold together. They all have the same kind of layering, all the same structure, and they relate together, and that's how the crystal builds. And so an alkali soap or an ammonium soap has a crystal structure. In addition to this kind of structure, there are ways in which the rod-like molecules can be positioned so that every other one can shift in a slightly different direction and make a herringbone effect, in which case you get different properties. The relationship of the layers can be completely parallel, or they can have a kind of an angle in between them. And in each case, each little bit of realignment and adjustment makes different properties for these different structures. Eventually, one can take a structure, a crystalline structure like that, and introduce a light beam to it, in which case one gets a kind of, the function here is called polarizing microscopy. Some details of a sample can be recognized using a polarizing microscope. Indeed, every liquid crystalline phase can exhibit certain typical textures explained later on. Thermotropic and various, that means heat-related structure at different temperatures, the crystal structure will be somewhat different. And there are other variations. If you take two light sources and you make those light sources coherent like lasers, and you have a crystal structure which is capable of recording atomic level variations on something about the size of a sugar cube, you can put a whole room full of CD-ROMs and encode it. So the next computers will be liquid crystal holographic inscribed libraries, 21st century computers. All of this is related to the differential consciousness discovering universal cosmic applications of functions which are readily identifiable in a medium ground called our personality. Our personality is like a prism. It's like a crystal prism about midway between the cosmos and a 0 point of equilibrium, which is the threshold between integration and differentiation. Our personality is, in terms of complexity, in terms of energy, structure for distribution and scattering, and many other properties, our personality is about midway between 0 and infinity. Cosmos is an infinite differential wholeness pattern. And at complete equanimity, inner equanimity, one comes to a 0 point, a vanishing point. Our personality is about midway between those two. This 0 point is the threshold where differentiation begins. Think of an hourglass. And the integration comes, packs tighter and tighter, comes to a point. But the very point of it, the very last period, the very last jot, does not occur as a something, but occurs as a threshold transitional openness. So that the very last iota of an integration is an acceptance space, called in Greek charis, called grace. It's there because of a gift rather than anything else. That particular focus, it's not a place, but a focus. That particular focus is the universal beginning of all periodicities. All periodicities. This is why even the term period, if you look up the term period to get a definition for it, Encyclopedia Britannica, 15th edition, period, the time interval between successive vibrations. The time interval between successive vibrations. If you have a 0 periodicity, you have no time. If you have an infinite periodicity, you have no time. The 0 time was symbolized by a movement like an infinity sign. An infinity sign put horizontally is like the 0. When the infinity sign is turned perpendicular to that and multiplied so that each infinity sign occurs in indefinite succession, this is expression of infinity. Where are those symbols written? They're written the first time that human beings ever make symbolic written records, about 5,000 years ago, Pyramid of Unas in Egypt. The upright infinity signs were interlinked cobras. When you want to be in time, in a time-bound form, then instead of having the infinite, vertical, interrelated cobra infinity signs, is called living time. Maurice Nicole beautifully wrote a little book after he wrote the 5 volumes of commentary, and Gurdjieff wrote a book called Living Time. He began to understand this is how it is. It's how it moves. when you're not in infinity or in zero, when you want to be in a time-bound form, working with the dimensions of things and stuff, then one has to work with circle. In which case, the cobra uraeus is around the head symbolically and just rears its head above. And so the pharaoh would wear the uraeus is symbol that he's at work in time, in a time form. But time in its forming can only maintain its reality of form in relationship to materia. So time is only bound in the material level of the universe. All material is time bound. All relationalities in atomic structures, in molecular structures, in compound structures, all have a time limit. Some of those time limits are very long. Hydrogen atoms, very, very long. But not infinite. All of those energy relationalities are subject to a law called entropy. That is to say that the energy ratio that holds their complementary reality, the time interval bit, the material bit, that glue lasts only as long as the lifetime of that particular cinching. And time and material cannot cinch forever. After a cycle of maybe billions of years, they still come undone. But once there is an equilibrium of a zero-based enlightenment, those complementation forms are eternal. They never are subject to entropy. They never come undone. There's no corrosive process that applies to them whatsoever. This is called laying up your treasures in heaven instead of on earth. That's what that's called. It doesn't mean don't lay your treasures on earth like in the tomb or in the pyramid or in the Swiss bank. It means in the material, time-bound universe as a whole. That long as that lasts, there is a threshold where entropy eventually takes over. But the principle is always for a complementation. And as entropy runs energy down, another process as the substrate is building up. Jung, in trying to find a term for this, coined a term called negentropy. Negentropy. And the only place in his writings where you find him bringing out his clear thought on negentropy is in the third volume of his great work on Aeon. In the American edition, it came out in just 2 volumes of the collected works, volume 9, parts 1 and 2. But in the original German, it was in 3 volumes. Not only parts 1 and 2, structure and dynamics of the psyche, and then Aeon, but the third volume was a volume called Aurora Consurgens. And Jung would not let that third volume be included in the collected works. Although Mary Mellon, who was putting up the money for the Bollingen series, said it has to be in the collected works, so they gave it a different number in the Bollingen series. It's not part of the collected works, a different color. Collected works are black. This volume is red. It appears as an odd volume, Aurora Consurgens, and they quickly let it go out of print, so it's not around, it's never been reprinted. Why? Because it's about the alchemical death vision of Thomas Aquinas. And the whole Roman Catholic Church is intellectually built on Thomistic philosophy. St. Thomas's crystal theory of understanding heaven and earth and man and God and angels and the whole thing, the Summa Theologica, was a time-bound structure that began to dissolve on Thomas Aquinas' deathbed, and he had an alchemical vision, which, of course, being conscientious, Aquinas, he's only 49, wrote it all down. On the psychological commentary and translation of Aurora Consurgens, when Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz were working on it, struck Jung as being very related to the way in which a certain physicist mathematician named Minkowski talked about the block structure of the universe, that space occurs in block structures in terms of a kind of positioned mathematical mentality, but as soon as you put it into a universal open process, the block nature of the universe disappears, and what you get is an infinity sign in 3 dimensions that involutes and convolutes constantly. So it's an appearing, disappearing dance. And Aquinas saw this on his deathbed and wrote it all down. That's why I called it Aurora. Aurora is the dawning, right? Consurgens, the beginning of the light of how it all works together. And in the translation and in the commentary, there's a preface by Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz. And the very preface of Aurora Consurgens talks about how negentropy, as a complementation to entropy, shows up in the deepest level of the psyche of man and in the farthest level of astrophysical theorizing. And that those 2 levels, the deepest level of the human psyche and the farthest level of the universe, are a threshold capable of a equanimity. What did he say? He said that if you go deep enough into man's psyche, you will come out at the farthest ends of the universe physically. If you go to the farthest ends of the universe, beyond the farthest quasars, you will emerge in someone's deep psyche. It's an Escher type situation. And that because all of us are capable of that in ultimate truth, it means that the cosmos is honeycombed by the wholeness of uncounted sentient individuals, and that we are the glue that holds it all together. And without us, it wouldn't occur because it would not have a time interval complement, an element. We provide time to the stuff of the universe. We temporize. We make it gel and be what it is. We're 4th dimension surfers. Which means then that when you get into deep physics on level of Bohr, when he's talking about the deepest levels of complementarity, we turn now to page 441 of Abraham Pius's Niels Bohr's Times. Already in 1929, Bohr had noted, but only in passing, that the description of living organisms in the description of living organisms, one might see a certain connection with the issues of quantum theory. In the deepest issues of living organisms, their psychic structure, at the very deepest center of their psychic structure, one begins to find the same issues of astrophysics in quantum theory. Pius writes, that brief remark developed into the main theme of the address, and the title of the address was Light and Life. Light and Life, which he gave in August 1932 at the opening session of the International Congress of Light Therapists in Copenhagen. Not physicists, therapists. Here for the first time, this is 1932, gang. Gone a long way since this, not news. Here for the first time, Bohr raised a question that was to preoccupy him off and on until his death. Would it ever be possible to push the analysis of living processes to the limit where they can be described in terms of pure physics and chemistry? Remember that electron microscopy is related very closely to biological spectroscopy. All these functions have a harmonic. Yes, it's very complex and very large, and it takes hell of a vision to be able to see it, but it's seeable. Not only is it seeable, it's doable, which is what pushes the buttons of those in control. Anybody in control of anything. The glue that holds their position is going to dissolve if you go to this dimension. It's not just that the authority is questioned, it's that the whole time-bound interval dissolves. And so the structure not only changes, it vanishes. It's no longer there at all. And what's amazing is it's as if it never was. That's what makes it illusion. Because it leaves no trace at all. None. There's no vibration that's ongoing at all. It's clear vision. The Buddha was asked one time, in your omniscient vision, can you see in any universe that will ever be or ever has been, has anyone ever achieved enlightenment because of the work of someone else? And his answer was not a single one. No one ever did or will on someone else's work. And of course they asked her, well, do you see anyone enlightened at all because of their own efforts? He said, more than the grains of the sands of the Ganges. Okay, 1932, August, Copenhagen, International Congress of Light Therapists. Niels Bohr, greatest physicist theorist of his time, talking about light and life. Preoccupied by a question that was to bother him until his death, would it be possible to push the analysis of living processes to the limit where they can be described in terms of pure physics and chemistry? The question at issue is whether some fundamental traits are still missing in the analysis of natural phenomenon before we can reach an understanding of life on the basis of physical experience. He noted that some biologists held the belief that no proper understanding of the essential aspects of life is possible in terms of purely physical terms. This would be known as vitalism. But of course, one of the great chemists of the day is Linus Pauling. Pauling and Bohr, very much brothers of genius, basic genius. It must be kept in mind, Bohr continued, that one would find no features foreign to inorganic matter by pushing the analysis of the constituents of a living organism to the molecular and atomic level. It must be kept in mind, however, that the conditions in biological and physical research are not directly comparable, since the necessity of keeping the object alive imposes a restriction on the former which finds no complement in the latter. Thus, we should doubtlessly kill an animal if we tried to carry the investigation of its organs so far that we could tell the part played by single atoms in vital functions. This is in 1932. By 1962, when Bohr died, things changed. And it was possible to say more. And that was 30-some years ago. And it's possible now to modify it even further. The yogi does not have to kill himself to analyze the psyche to zero base. In fact, one very vivified by the whole process. But that process is not available at all for imagination. Imagination condenses itself into symbolic impacting long before that even occurs, that threshold even occurs. So there's no way to imagine it. There's no way to have images of it. And symbols become transcendent long before that 0 point is base, so there's no way to symbolize it. But because it can't be imagined and because it can't be symbolized, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Because the proof that it happens is that one can, in retrospect, see that this is the only accounting for what now occurs in very regular periodistic fashion. This must have occurred. That kind of a threshold must have been passed. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. And what we're going to use next week is a different pair. We're going to go from Bohr and Mary Leakey now to Black Holes and Time Warps by Kip Thorne. A black hole is like a vanishing point in the cosmos. It's like a 0 point in the yogi. And The Conscious Universe by Kafatos. That there's something about the universe which is conscious, and the consciousness of the universe is not because it's an entity, but the consciousness is there as a complementation because black holes occur. And black holes have something to do with time warping because there is a physical direction of time, and this physical direction of time is intimately tied up with the materia. And as long as materia and time are glued together, then the stuff of the universe holds. But when either component is dissolved, that stuff vanishes. And the only telltale trace that something has occurred and continues to occur, that a differential flow is operating, is that the very first reoccurrence of a differential matter, quite distinct from the old stuff, are pairs of excited ions called Hawking radiation. And like a supernatural mist around black holes, Hawking radiation, pairs of transcendent molecules, molecular materia, of a differential nature, occur. And there's no way that they come from surrounding space. They come as a resonance of the black hole. So we're going to talk about that next week. With the old phrase, the Lord willing and the creek don't rise.